Under the gray skies of San Francisco, Lucas Marshall stood motionless, his hands buried in the pockets of his rain-soaked coat, as the city pulsed indifferently around him. Cars honked, people rushed past, and somewhere in the distance, the muffled clang of a cable car echoed through the drizzle. But Lucas was frozen in time, caught in the eye of a storm no one else could see. 30 days. That's all it took to dismantle the carefully constructed life he had spent years building. 1 month ago, Lucas was a rising star in the startup world. His app had just hit 50,000 downloads, investors were calling, and he was planning a quiet getaway with Mia, his girlfriend of 5 years, who had stood by him since the first sleepless night he wrote code on his apartment floor. Then it all collapsed. First, the lead investor withdrew after a brutal market dip, triggering a chain reaction of panic that dried up their funding overnight. Next, Mia left. No fight, no drama, just quiet resignation in her voice as she whispered, "You're never really here anymore, Lucas. Not for me, not for yourself." And then just when he thought he'd found the bottom, his best friend, Jeremy, was killed in a motorcycle accident. No warning, no goodbye. One call in the middle of the night that made the rest of the world fade into static. Lucas stopped eating, stopped sleeping. The man who once pitched ideas with fire in his eyes now couldn't find the energy to get out of bed. He wandered the streets of the city, headphones playing white noise, desperate for silence inside his own skull. Everything he had counted on, love, friendship, ambition, had dissolved like fog on the bay. He had nothing left but questions. And one question above all haunted him every moment he was awake. How do you stay calm when your world has just burned to the ground? But the world didn't stop for him. Deadlines still came. Emails still pinged. The sun still rose over a city that had no time for broken men. On a rain-slick night, Lucas found himself near the edge of the Golden Gate Bridge. He hadn't meant to come here. His legs had carried him on instinct, as if they too were looking for something that might anchor him. The bridge loomed above him strong, massive, unshaken by time, storms, or tragedy. And for the first time in weeks, Lucas felt something. Not peace, not hope, curiosity. How does something stand so still, so powerful while everything around it is chaos? That's when he heard it. A voice from a stranger's podcast that happened to autoplay in his headphones. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself during war, during plague, during betrayal, not to be remembered, but to survive his own mind. Lucas paused. Marcus who? He hit rewind. He didn't know it then, but in that moment, with the cold rain clinging to his skin and his soul hanging by a thread, Lucas Marshall was about to discover a philosophy that would rebuild him from the inside out. A philosophy buried in ancient texts, whispered across millennia by men who had faced the very same question. How do you stay calm in the storm? Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey of transformation, take a second to support the channel. Hit that subscribe button and help us bring more stories like this to life. Every click fuels more content that might just shift someone's world. And now a quick challenge for you. Think fast. If everything you depend on vanished tomorrow, what would you still have? A control over your thoughts and reactions. Be nothing if you lose it all. You're lost too. Drop your answer in the comments, A or B. Let's see who's really ready to think like a Stoic. Morning fog still clung to the trees in Golden Gate Park as Lucas Marshall walked, hands in his pockets, eyes low to the ground. It had been 3 weeks since the bridge, since that moment of stillness when something ancient had briefly cracked, opened the door to his soul. He didn't know what he was looking for. Peace, maybe, or just the absence of pain. But every day since then, he walked miles at a time. The city had become a kind of moving meditation, even if he didn't yet know to call it that. On this particular morning, a podcast he didn't remember downloading queued up in his earbuds. The voice was calm, unhurried, almost meditative. Marcus, Aurelius, it said, did not write his meditations for the world. He wrote them for himself, for survival, for clarity. Lucas slowed his steps. Imagine being the ruler of the known world, and still needing to remind yourself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That sentence hit something primal in Lucas. He stopped walking. It wasn't the authority of it. It wasn't even the philosophy. It was the fact that anyone had faced such chaos and responded not with control, but with calm, not by lashing out, but by turning inward. Lucas went home and replayed the podcast twice. He ordered a used copy of Meditations that same night, not because he expected answers, but because it felt like a thread worth pulling. And when the book arrived, worn and underlined by someone else's hand, he started reading it the way some people read holy texts slowly, with reverence, as if every line might be a lifeline. One passage in particular became his anchor. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. It didn't make him feel better, not exactly, but it made him feel less alone. He started journaling, not because someone told him to, but because Marcus had done it, and it seemed to work. Each morning, Lucas wrote a single page before checking his phone, before speaking a word to anyone. The first few entries were chaos rants, fragmented sentences, grief scribbled in ink. But slowly, patterns emerged. His thinking slowed down. Reactions softened. The act of writing became a mirror, a kind of internal detox from the endless noise of his mind. Around the same time, Lucas began noticing how hyper-connected and overstimulated he'd become. His phone buzzed, constantly news alerts, social media pings, email promotions, all of it fueling a nervous system already on edge. He remembered something from Epictetus. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. That line gave him permission to opt out, so he did. He deleted every app that wasn't essential. No Instagram, no Twitter, no news, no validation-seeking scroll sessions. For the first time in years, Lucas sat with himself unfiltered. At first it was maddening, then it was cleansing. With the noise dialed down, he could finally hear something else. Silence, breath, the thoughts beneath his thoughts, stillness. He hadn't known it, but stillness was what he'd been chasing all along. Not the absence of problems, but the space to face them without being consumed. The Stoics, he realized, weren't some dry collection of philosophers talking about logic and reason. They were people like him, just in different clothes, fighting the same battles, trying to stay grounded while the world shook around them. Lucas created a small ritual. Every night, he lit a candle not for spiritual reasons, but as a symbol, a quiet flicker in the dark. He'd sit for 10 minutes in silence, no music, no stimulation, just him and the flame. It was awkward at first. Then, it became sacred. That simple act of choosing stillness over stimulation rewired something inside him. The world hadn't changed. His startup was still on the brink. His heart was still broken. But Lucas was different. Not because he had solved his problems, but because he had begun to look at them with new eyes. He didn't feel strong, not yet, but he felt anchored, rooted, and for the first time since everything had fallen apart, he didn't feel like he was drowning. He felt like he was learning how to swim. It started with the cold. Lucas Marshall had never been the kind of person who enjoyed discomfort. He liked his morning coffee hot, his shower steaming, and his work environment predictable. But as he stood barefoot on the freezing sand of Baker Beach at sunrise, everything about that moment defied his old habits. The wind whipped through his hoodie, his breath came out in clouds, and his muscles tensed against the Pacific chill. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to go back to the car and warm up. But he didn't. He stood there, eyes locked on the horizon, and stayed, because something in him knew. Growth doesn't come wrapped in comfort. Over the past month, As Lucas immersed himself in Stoic philosophy, he kept circling back to one idea: voluntary discomfort. The concept seemed absurd at first. Why would anyone choose to suffer, especially when life already had a way of dishing out hardship on its own? But the more he read, the more he understood. This wasn't about punishment. It was about preparation, about conditioning the mind to remain steady, no matter what storm rolled in. So Lucas built a routine from that principle. Every morning began with that freezing run along the coastline. He'd strip away the layers of comfort, both literal and mental, and greet the world raw. Some mornings he cursed the wind. Other mornings he welcomed it like a teacher, but he always showed up. He read Seneca's words again and again. Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, is this the condition that I feared? Lucas decided to test it. For 1 week, he lived simply, almost absurdly so. He ate only rice and beans. He slept on a yoga mat on the hardwood floor of his apartment. He wore the same gray t-shirt and jeans every day. He turned off the heater even when the temperature dropped to the low 40s at night. He wasn't performing. No one was watching. He just wanted to meet his fears on their own ground. What he found wasn't misery. It was clarity. Without the usual comforts to distract him, Lucas saw himself more clearly. His cravings, his dependence on little luxuries, his tendency to avoid, to soften, to numb. But slowly, something shifted. The fear of losing things: his apartment, his company, his sense of identity, began to loosen its grip. He realized that the worst-case scenarios he'd built up in his mind weren't death sentences. They were survivable, sometimes even freeing. He started to trust himself more, and with that trust came an idea. Every Sunday, he invited a small group of friends, fellow entrepreneurs, artists, and even one old college buddy going through a divorce to a coffee shop tucked inside a bookstore in the Mission. They called it Stoic Sundays. The rules were simple. Each person brought a quote, a challenge they were facing, and one uncomfortable action they'd taken that week. Phones were off. Ego was checked at the door. At first, it was awkward. People weren't used to talking about fear and discomfort in public. But by the third week, something cracked open. Vulnerability gave way to connection. One friend admitted he was terrified of rejection and had challenged himself to cold email 10 strangers. Another shared how she had stopped lying about how busy she was just to avoid feelings of worthlessness. Lucas shared too. He talked about loss, about waking up with anxiety clawing at his chest. He talked about cold showers and hard floors. But most of all, he talked about how discomfort had become his mirror, and in that mirror, he was starting to recognize someone strong, not unbreakable, not fearless, but willing. That willingness became his fuel. Whenever a new challenge arose, angry client email, a technical bug that threatened to ruin a launch, the sudden spike of grief when he walked past a place he and Jeremy once laughed together, he no longer recoiled. He leaned in. He had trained for this. Resilience, Lucas realized, wasn't about building walls. It was about building stamina, mental, emotional, physical, and the secret no one tells you. It's a muscle. You can strengthen it day by day, breath by breath, freeze by freeze. And so each morning, he still ran toward the ocean, even when he didn't want to, especially when he didn't want to. Not because the pain was noble, but because in that pain, he was finally becoming free. It was supposed to be the turning point. Lucas Marshall had prepared for weeks, refining every slide, practicing every word of the pitch. A major investment firm, one of the biggest on the West Coast, was finally interested. This was the meeting that could pull his startup back from the edge of collapse. He stood in a glass conference room, dressed sharper than usual, heart pounding just enough to feel alive. But halfway through his presentation, he saw the shift in posture, the distracted glances, the silent signal among the partners. They were out. "We appreciate your time," one of them said with a tight smile. "But it's not the right fit for us at this stage." The words echoed louder than the silence that followed. Lucas nodded, collected his laptop, and walked out calmly. But the moment the doors closed behind him, something inside cracked. All the progress he thought he'd made, mentally, emotionally, seemed to vanish in an instant. Rage crept up his throat, not because of the rejection, but because he had let himself hope. That hope felt like betrayal. He walked aimlessly for hours, ending up at the edge of Lake Merced. The water was still untouched by the chaos brewing inside him. He sat on a bench, gripping the wood so tightly his knuckles turned white. For a moment, he hated everything: his company, his choices, the endless grind. The silence taunted him. Then, a line he'd written in his journal the week before surfaced in his mind. "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it, that matters." Epictetus, Lucas exhaled. He had read that quote at least a dozen times, but now, for the first time, it wasn't just a concept, it was a test. Could he actually live it? He pulled out his phone, opened the Notes app, and typed 2 columns. On the left he wrote, "Out of my control." On the right, "Within my control." Under "out of my control," he listed investor decisions, market trends, others' opinions, outcomes. Under "within my control," he wrote, "How I respond, my preparation, my values, my next step." It was embarrassingly simple, but it felt like oxygen. For so long, Lucas had measured success by how much he could manipulate the external world. But the Stoics didn't think like that. They trained their focus inward, not to avoid the world, but to meet it on their own terms. That night, Lucas sat down at his desk and wrote a letter, not to the investors, not even to himself. He titled it, "Dear Chaos, Dear Chaos, I see you now. You used to terrify me. I believed you were the enemy, that if I didn't control you, you would destroy me. But you've been here all along, every setback, every heartbreak, every plan that unraveled. You never promised to be fair. You never owed me peace. And still, I kept demanding certainty from you, like a child throwing sand at the ocean. But here's the truth I've come to understand. I don't need you to be calm. I need to be calm in your presence. So do what you do. Come in waves. Break things. Rearrange what I thought was stable. I'll be here still, steady, practicing what I know now. What I control is enough." As he hit save, something released in his chest. Not relief, exactly, but permission. Permission to stop pretending. He was supposed to master everything around him. Permission to just be human in a chaotic world, and to meet that world with clarity instead of desperation. The next day, Lucas returned to his team and told them the truth. "We lost the funding," he said plainly, "but we haven't lost the mission. We control our integrity. We control our effort. And if we stay aligned with that, I believe we'll find another door." No one clapped. No dramatic music played. But there was a quiet shift in the room. People nodded. Someone smiled. Chaos had come again. But this time, Lucas didn't fight it. He reframed it. And by doing so, he reclaimed his power. Something had shifted in Lucas Marshall, and people around him began to notice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. But it was undeniable. There was a steadiness in his voice that hadn't been there before. A deliberate calm in his movements. Like a man who had weathered the storm and come out not unscarred, but unshaken. His startup team, once tense and frayed by uncertainty, had started to take their cues from him. Where panic used to ripple through morning meetings, there was now quiet focus. Lucas didn't demand more from his team, he simply embodied it. His presence had become the standard. The way he listened, the way he responded, the way he breathed. Before answering hard questions, it changed the air in the room. He wasn't trying to be a leader anymore. He was becoming one. There was a moment that crystallized this shift. A major client had just discovered a glitch in their softwares, something that could have caused thousands in lost revenue. The client was furious. The call came in just after lunch, the kind of message that used to send Lucas spiraling into stress. His operations manager looked to him, expecting the usual scramble. Calls, apologies, frantic code reviews. But instead, Lucas took a deep breath and asked just one question. Is this fixable? Yes, his lead developer replied. But it's going to take a few hours. Then let's fix it, Lucas said. No excuses, no blame, just resolve. He called the client personally, took full responsibility, promised a detailed report, offered transparency over perfection. The client, to everyone's surprise, didn't leave. In fact, they thanked him for his honesty, for his steadiness, for showing up like someone who wasn't afraid of problems. After the call ended, one of his newer team members leaned over and said half-jokingly, "What are you on, man? I need some of that." Lucas smiled. Just a little stoicism. It wasn't a secret. He had begun to integrate the philosophy into the company's culture, not through speeches, but through small, consistent actions. Every Monday, the team started with 10 quiet minutes of journaling. No computers, no distractions, just a prompt on the whiteboard. What are you afraid of this week? And beneath that, what can you control? At first, it felt awkward. Engineers shifted in their chairs. Designers stared blankly at the page. But over time, those 10 minutes became sacred. People started opening up. The space created permission not to vent, but to process, to clarify, to lead themselves before leading others. Lucas encouraged his team not to chase calm, but to practice it. In one-on-ones, he'd ask questions that dug beneath the surface. Are you reacting, or are you responding? Is this fear, or is this fact? What would it look like to meet this challenge with courage instead of control? And the results showed not just in productivity, but in morale. People stayed later, not because they were forced to, but because they felt grounded in something bigger than KPIs and quarterly goals. They were part of a mission that demanded resilience, yes, but also clarity, character, and presence. Lucas found himself transformed to. He stopped micromanaging, stopped obsessing over outcomes. He trusted more, delegated more, breathed more. He made fewer decisions from fear and more from principle. He was no longer ruled by the chaos outside. He was anchored by the calm within. One evening, after a long day, Lucas stood at the office window as the city lights flickered on below. He could hear the hum of keyboards, the quiet rhythm of a team in motion. No one asked him what to do. No one needed him to fix anything. They were leading themselves now. And that, he realized, was the greatest gift Stoicism had given him, not the power to control others, but the clarity to inspire them through his own example. Leadership, he had learned, wasn't about having all the answers. It was about embodying the kind of presence that made others believe they could find their own. Lucas Marshall stood on the rooftop of his apartment as the sun broke through the horizon, casting gold over the sprawl of San Francisco. The city stirred beneath him-car horns in the distance, the faint clang of streetcars, the quiet hum of people beginning another unpredictable day. But up here, in the crisp morning air, everything felt still. Not silent, not void, but still, like the inside of a mind that had finally learned how to listen. It hadn't been a straight path. Nothing in Lucas's life had come in clean lines or easy choices. The pain was still real, the loss still etched into memory, but something fundamental had changed, not in the world, but within him. He had built something, not a business, though that too was slowly taking root again. Not just routines or habits, or even emotional balance. He had built a fortress, one that couldn't be seen from the outside, but one he could feel in every breath. The Stoics called it the inner citadel, place inside yourself that cannot be touched by external events. Marcus Aurelius wrote of it as if it were sacred. Epictetus described it like a fortress, impregnable, self-contained, forged in discipline. Lucas hadn't understood it at first, but now, after months of showing up when it was hard, choosing reason over reaction, embracing discomfort instead of running from it, he got it. Calm wasn't a personality trait. It wasn't something you were born with. It was a skill, a muscle, something you earned through practice, through failures, through the smallest of moments. He remembered one of those moments clearly. Just 2 weeks ago, his startup hit another snag, a data loss issue triggered by a software update. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to set off alarms. His inbox filled with complaints. Slack channels erupted. He could feel the old reaction, clawing at his chest. Fix it now. Yell. Panic. Take control. Instead, he did nothing for 1 full minute. He closed his laptop, closed his eyes, focused on his breath. In through the nose. 4 seconds hold. Out through the mouth. Slow. Then he reopened the screen, delegated the right people, and scheduled a meeting not to assign blame, but to find clarity. The problem was solved in under a day. But more importantly, no one spiraled. His team had followed his lead, not because he demanded it, but because he modeled it. That's what calm does. It becomes a mirror. The more you carry it, the more others find it in themselves. Lucas had started using that as his compass, not productivity, not recognition, just presence. The ability to show up fully, to act with integrity, even when the world gave him every reason not to. He also began teaching it not formally, but through invitation. Friends who used to come to him for startup advice now asked deeper questions. How do you stay centered? How do you stop the fear from taking over? He never gave them bullet points. He told them the truth, that fear doesn't go away, but it does lose its power when you stop feeding it, that the practice is daily, not dramatic, that it's in the way you wake up, in how you speak to a barista, in what you do when no one's watching, that it's in letting go of what's out of your hands and mastering what's in your heart. Lucas called it a practice on purpose, because it's never finished, and so he created something new for himself, a ritual for realignment. 1 day a month, he'd do what he called the 24-hour Stoic reset. No tech, no indulgence, just walking, journaling, reflecting, fasting, simplifying, living like the man he wanted to be, measured, grounded, humble. He invited others to try it too. Some laughed it off, some joined, but no matter who showed up, Lucas did it alone if he had to, because it wasn't about the image, it was about the internal weight it carried. On the rooftop, he exhaled and whispered what had become his mantra. Calm is a skill, and I practice it today. The world hadn't gotten easier, the chaos hadn't stopped, but Lucas Marshall had stopped needing the world to be calm for him to feel peace. He had built that peace within himself, and now he would never be without it. From the first collapse to the quiet calm on that rooftop, the story of Lucas Marshall is not about success in the way we usually define it. It's not about making millions, winning every battle, or standing tall without scars. It's about something much more meaningful. The transformation of a man from being controlled by chaos to becoming calm in the very heart of it. And that's something every one of us can relate to. Lucas didn't start his journey with wisdom. He started with pain. He lost everything, his business on the verge of failure, the woman he loved walking away, and the death of his best friend leaving a wound that words could never fill. For a moment, he almost disappeared into the noise, into the grief, into himself. But something inside him refused to die. A voice, quiet and ancient, called him to stillness. That voice took form in the writings of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, not as distant philosophers, but as fellow travelers who once stood exactly where he stood, and with their guidance, Lucas did not rebuild the old version of himself. He created a new foundation, not on control, but on clarity, not on avoiding pain, but facing it with presence. He ran through fog and cold. He wrote with brutal honesty. He stripped away comforts to meet his fears face to face. And in that stripped-down version of himself, he found something unshakable. He found his inner fortress, not a shield that blocked out pain, but a structure that held firm through it. He brought that stillness into his work, his relationships, his community. He taught others not with preaching, but with presence. And he lived not to eliminate chaos, but to reframe it as part of the path. This is not a hero's tale. This is a human story. And in that way, it belongs to all of us. Because life will collapse, we will lose, we will break. But the truth is, we don't rise by escaping that. We rise by standing still in the center of it and choosing who we will be. So what's the lesson in Lucas's journey? It's this. Calm is not something the world gives you. It's something you build every day through small choices, through quiet discipline, through the decision to respond, not react. And you don't need to start with strength. You just need to start with one moment of awareness, one breath, one pause, one question. Is this within my control? If the answer is no, let it go. If the answer is yes, act with grace. In today's world, where everything moves fast and emotions flare even faster, Lucas's story reminds us that peace isn't passive. It's practiced. It's not a luxury. It's a lifeline. And it's available to anyone willing to do the work inside. Now, I want to hear from you. What part of Lucas's story resonated with you the most? Was it the collapse? The rebuilding? The stillness? Or maybe it's the idea that calm is a skill you can practice, even in the hardest moments. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Just type your answer below so we can learn from each other. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or made you pause for even a second, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us create more content like this, stories that speak to something deeper, and lessons that just might change the way we move through the world. Thank you for being here. And remember, your calm is your power. Build it, keep it, live it.